Hello, everyone. Welcome to another question and response session. This is Dr. Claire Moon, and we'll be spending the next hour talking about astrology. So, if you are joining me for the first time, welcome. If you're joining me again, welcome back. You can always look to the right-hand side of your screen. We have a chat over there. You can, if people show up, we can chat with each other. If you have a question today, that's where you can put it. And if you're joining me later and this is not live anymore, put them in the comment section below and I'll get at them next month. So I do this question and response. It's the same every month, give or take here and there if I end up having like a Thursday night thing, but it's usually the second Thursday night of every month at 7 p.m. Central Time. So, yeah, I guess, I didn't do a call for questions this time. I figured I'd just let people show up and ask what they needed to ask. But I did want to talk about structure, order, and the planets this evening. That is my little title. And oh, my thoughts are that planets signify stuff, and the archetypes of a planet can signify a thing. And sometimes I feel like a thing is signified by more than one planet. And so I think that's what we'll explore today. In particular, the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn, and how those three planets may or may not be involved in order and structure in terms of their significations. So I wanted to talk about that. I also there was something else. I had another agenda item. Um, Mercury and their speed. I wanted to talk about that as well. Those are my only two agenda items. So we'll see what happens. We'll see where the wind takes us. But if you are here, know that there's a 20-second lag on the chat. So if you do chat and I don't see it for a good 20, 30 seconds, that's why. Actually, I didn't even have my software up. Let's look at the software. So just for fun, yeah, what's going on right now? I did not elect this because it happens the same time every month. So I get whatever dice roll I get. It actually looks pretty decent. I mean, the electional astrology practice, I guess, first. Oh yeah, and I wanted to go back to my roots because this is like my 3-year anniversary-ish of doing this. I started doing these on Instagram ages ago, and then I moved it over here eventually. But I used to start with a bunch of quotes, so I want to go back to doing that. I miss doing that, but this is fun too. So anytime we're just picking a chart as a kind of general elections, general decent decent sky chunk to work under and seed things into. Uh, that's electional astrology. And so just looking randomly at this chart that I have now in my location in Madison, Wisconsin at 7 p.m. Make it exactly 7. The chart ruler is Mars over here in Aries in the 6th house. So Mars is doing fantastic in terms of sign, in terms of being in their joy in the 6th. But the 6th house is generally a more difficult place for a planet to be. This is a day chart, though. So I do want the malefic contrary to sect in a cadent place like the 6th, the 12th, the 9th, the 3rd, ideally moving away from an angle, losing power. This is a nice place for Mars, I think. Not really configured to an angle though. So I don't know, you have two minds about it, right? Because you want the chart ruler to be in good shape. You want them to be configured to an angle, if possible, if they're in the 6th within 3 degrees, because that helps kind of lift the planet up and out of that cadent place. But at the same time, you do want to put the malefic contrary to sect in a cadent place, not angular. So depending on what your usages are, this might not be the best option. So, like, for instance, today, how I would look at this if I was starting something at 7 p.m. Central Time on the second Tuesday of every month, uh, I would be looking at this chart saying, I don't know. I guess if anyone tried to troll me on the internet, I would have to pick my battles because I might get into one. Yeah, with that Mars there. I don't know. Maybe this will just be cut short. I have no idea. That's another Mars thing. But what is nice about this chart is on the descendant. I didn't plan this, but it's always nice to have Venus on the descendant, Venus on an angle. So we'll take that. That's pretty nice. And Jupiter is here too. All right. So that's the chart for now. The moon is waxing. I don't know if it's visible yet, but we'll see. Oh, hello, Reverend Kai. Welcome. Let me know if you have any questions. Oh, yeah. And then quotey quotes. And then we'll talk about structure and order and planets because I went on a whole rabbit hole that I've been meaning to go on for a really long time. The whole structure, order, planets thing. It's one of those cyclical astrological discourses that the astrology community goes on about every now and then. And it's like, I feel like every 6 months, it's like the same cycle of stuff. And that's one of them is like people arguing whether Saturn is structure and order or whether it's the sun or whether it's that's usually the two that I see. Jupiter is also a hot contender. So uh, after all of this, not to bury the lead, but I think I found a brand new Aquarian hill to die upon. Hey babe, wake up. New hill to die upon, just dropped. And I think structure and order is a diurnal thing. I think it's all three of them. And you cannot make me choose. You can't make me choose one planet to be in charge of it. I won't do it. I pick all of them. And I'll tell you why. Okay. I'm gonna I have my giant stack of quotes. And this, okay, so funny story that I like to tell about this is my last year in pharmacy, which was like 3 years ago. Wow. Um, I got one of those like cheesy quote calendars, like a quote per day calendar from my boss. And it was all these like Buddhist Zen quotes. It was actually awesome. And I love my boss for getting me that. Uh, she also, that's the same boss that uh, I was like proud, but also really angry because I totally have my chart ruler in the third decan of Sagittarius, which is like very like horse, horse puns everywhere. But my boss told me that I had a reputation as a workhorse. Yeah. And I was like, oh, cool. I guess I got a doctorate to be a workhorse. I digress. She got me this calendar, and now I use it as a random little bibliomancy tool. I'm not going to look at it. I don't like that one. This one's kind of trite. We'll keep it. We'll read it. I'm gonna pick another one. That's 2 out of 3. Oh, that's nice. Okay. I'll read the first one that I didn't like for fun. And then I promise we'll do astrology. Um, there's no way of perceiving the world that doesn't involve carving it conceptually into pieces. And this is Leda Cosmides. There's no way of perceiving the world that doesn't involve carving it conceptually into pieces. I don't know about that. I mean, I think there are ways of perceiving the world that ideally, in an ideal world, maybe we can refrain from carving it conceptually into pieces. That's hard for our brains to do, though. We love doing that. That's why I was like, whatever. That's not aspirational at all. Sorry, Lita, no offense. And then this is Robert Frost. I don't really know much about him. I think he's a poet or something. In 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. It's like, yeah, thanks. Water is wet. Okay. I'm just okay, real talk. Mars is in Aries right now, and that's my third house, and I can already tell I'm being naughty. Um, this is from Nisargata Maharaj. And they said, I like this one. This one's nice. See what you are. Don't ask others. Don't let others tell you about yourself. Look within and see. Yeah, says the astrologer who spends all day telling people about themselves. But I like this. It's just listen to yourself. If you want to know who you are, you probably know. And that's usually what I tell people when I start off readings. I'm like, you know you best. I can guess a billion archetypal ways that certain planets in a place can come out. It's much more accurate and faster to just have a conversation with the person about what's going on and who they are, because they know better than I do, even with the chart. All right, let's talk about this because I made a spreadsheet about this. And some of the sources that I have, I guess I could put them in print below later. Because I have them somewhere. I have this bibliography typed out already, mostly somewhere. But I looked at Vedius Valens Anthology. I looked at Dorotheus Carmen Astrologicum, Rhetorius Compendium, and then more modernly, I looked at Avalar and Ribeiro's On the Heavenly Spheres. I supplemented Valens with Chris Brennan's book, Hellenistic Astrology, because his footnotes are fantastic and he has all of like the Greek versions of words. So I might actually read some of that tonight, just so we can really workshop like what were these Greek words that we see Valens using at least in terms of the Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter. And then Demetra George and her volume 1 of Ancient Astrology. So those, and then the Orphic hymns, which is great because I was just before this, of course, ever trying to catch up on the astrology podcast. But the astrology podcast, there is a episode on the Orphic mysteries and what is it? The Orphic mysteries and ancient astrology. And it's Kristen Mathis and Drew Levanti on the astrology podcast talking about the Orphic hymns. I also I want to reference them today. So those are all my references. Let me see if there's any questions and that my sound settings are good, and then we'll get into it. Okay. So the first one I want to go over is the sun, and I'm just gonna rattle some of these. What I did was, actually, let me get the book. But what I did was I just plucked, I curated my own list of relevant quotes. So I'll be sharing the text that I got it from, the planet we're talking about, and I'm actually gonna grab a book. Hold, please. Okay. So, first one is about the sun. So, the sun. Valens talks a lot about it being in a rulership, a planet of rulership, a planet signifying ordinances of the gods, judgment, those who rule, and kingships. One of the, and I guess let me get to the page here. The sun, Helios, talks about notable figures, action, the Greek word praxis, which is a word that also gets associated with the 10th house sometimes. So action, practice, praxis. The sun being about action. It's a fire entity. We've got, let's see. Yeah, the word hegemony. So the Greek word hegemonian, hegemonian. In quotes here on page 168 of Chris Brennan's book, we've got leadership, hegemony, supremacy, those who are at the top of a command structure. So kind of saying the same thing as king and rulership. Celebrities, highly reputable people, high priests of the fatherland, whatever that means, management of places, leaders of places. And that's the sun. And then when we look at, I didn't notice anything that was super different from that in Dorotheus. A lot of other like Rhetorius and then George both comment on the fact that the sun orders the seasons as it hits the tropical angles. It orders the seasons, it orders the days with its light, it orders the years with its revolutions, versus the moon is said to regulate the weeks and the months. Demetra George gives these kind of natural essences of the planets or base essences or base natures of the planets. And Demetra George says the nature of the sun is to build. So when we talk about like structure and building, I think that can be kind of part of it as well. So here we see that with the sun. In Orphic hymns, the sun is called the Lord of Years, organizes the day and the year, basically. So we see that cosmic ordering from the sun in that way. Jupiter, on the other hand, oh, and let me get back to the sun. Sorry, I did miss one thing here. From Avalar and Ribeiro, they had mentioned, and I think this is from Valens too, the principle underlying all things. That seems pretty orderly and structurally, the principle underlying all things. So that's what we have for sun. Then we get to Jupiter, and Valens notes authorities, knowledge, justice, arbitrations, among many other things. Dorotheus talks about those who will attend to the house of kings, those who will attend to the house of kings and commanders, who will be master of assets and goods. Rhetorius mentions justice, authority, terms in public office, honors, priesthoods, ruling over cities, and managing affairs of other people, or sorry, managing affairs of the people. Avalar and Ribeiro comment justice, religion, law. There's a footnote in Hellenistic astrology that talks about management of household or family. And then Demetra George says the nature of Jupiter is to expand and affirm, productive of life force, bearing children, knowledge, justice. They note that mythically speaking, both Zeus and Marduk, who are other names for Jupiter, both battled a dragon and then reestablished order in the cosmos. So we can see order of the cosmos. And even just thinking about knowledge, justice, law, that is a kind of structure and order. And certainly, you know, Jupiter being that more cohesive bringing together of things. Insofar as Jupiter, you know, it's the meaning maker, storyteller, it affirms things. So that would make sense in terms of ordering and structure. Being in charge of stuff, that seems to be a thing. So what else here? And I did have a question too. This is something I was thinking about the myth of Marduk and Zeus battling a dragon to establish order in the cosmos. Is this supposed to be taken literally in that Jupiter is creating order, restoring order, establishing order, dealing with this chaos dragon? Or is this just a parable to show how powerful Jupiter is in general, given that Jupiter and Zeus were definitely these kind of all kind of the ultimate god figure. In the Thomas Taylor version of the Orphic hymns, with Jupiter, we see Jupiter referred to, or in this case, it would be Zeus, all parent, principle, and end of all, O various formed, from whom all nature springs. And Jupiter being in charge of nature, I did see here, it said ovarious formed, and Jupiter and Zeus would always take all these various forms and do all these, horrible, horrible things, as like a swan or like a cow or something or a bull. So ovarious formed sounds like Jupiter. Sarah Mastros's Orphic hymn, there's a reference to Jupiter here, the beginning of everything and the ultimate end. So all of this, yeah, order, structure, all of that makes sense for Jupiter. Um, and then we get to Saturn. So Saturn, some snippets of things, the administration of that which belongs to others, which is interesting because we see that said a little bit with Jupiter as well. Um, the kind of difference I got from that, like you'll see this with Pretorius and Valens, they all mention, and Dorotheus, they all mention farming and agriculture and land. And especially when you put Jupiter and Saturn together, which I've been doing a lot of research because I'm doing this workshop for Jupiter going into Gemini soon. If you want to sign up, I have a workshop. It's on my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. Uh, but anyway, I've been looking at Jupiter and Saturn square. That's coming up a lot. And it is interesting that all the authors, they're really talking about the similar thing of the management of stuff and things. It's like a lot of overseeing of things, and Jupiter seems like more of the stately, political, kind of higher up admin role versus Saturn seems like kind of more of like the farmhand, grunt worker, blue collar version of things because they had rulerships over fields, buildings, waterside properties. Um, well-conditioned Saturn, especially being in charge of all of these things. Lands, buildings, real estates. You can read about that. Oh, I did actually put a note here, page 162 and 163 of Dorotheus, the Carmen Astrologicum by Dr. Ben Dykes. In Avelar and Rubedo, Saturn is said to be a symbol of containment, frugality, structure, hard work, austere actions that demand order. Jupiter and Saturn being some of the greater planets that mark time in a really big cycles. So like, for instance, the Saturn and Jupiter conjunction, that type of part of the cycle that are longer. With the footnotes in Hellenistic Astrology by Brennan, we see rigorous, strict, exacting. We also see apraxis, which is interesting because that's the opposite of the sun. That's praxis or action. Saturn, apraxis, not action, inaction. So when we think about delays or things going slowly with Saturn, it could even be is so slow that it's not moving at all. Let's see. I'm just seeing if there's anything else relevant that I missed, but yeah, we're not seeing as much structurally stuff with Saturn. I think we can kind of hear that in some of these Saturnian things. It's like, yeah, they're in charge of stuff. They impose some kind of rule over some things in a similar way that the sun might or that Jupiter might, but it's slightly different. And it also is seen as, so Demetra George says Saturn is associated with the destructive force of nature. It is also what is old and ancient, what is the nature, it says Saturn has the nature to endure. So the god of agriculture, irrigation, aqueducts, land, those who rent and labor upon it, father time, ruling over old age and death. So whereas Sun and Jupiter are more of this generative force, Saturn is more of the destructive force. At the same time, Saturn is what endures. And it is interesting, the whole irrigation aqueduct type of thing. That to me, I mean, it's connecting places that are really desolate and far away, and Saturn having to do with very desolate, kind of maybe far away places. Um, Waterside trades, I mean, anytime you're going onto the sea, into the sea, it's very isolating, very lonely, perhaps. It's very dangerous, which also can be a Saturn thing. But we're not seeing as much about um, structure and order. There's rigorousness, there's There's restrictions. And we do know that Saturn is borders, boundaries, edges, walls, barriers. So now this is where I think it gets down to semantics quite a bit and what one we would have to sit down and define our terms. What do you mean by structure exactly? What do you mean by order, specifically? Because, what is four walls? It's a room, a container, a containment, a prison, something restriction wise or containment wise. That can be taken metaphorically, that can be taken literally. Um, Saturn, being something that has to do with the almost like the enforcement of the law, the tax collectors, for instance, the debt collectors. I can imagine Saturn being kind of more the rule of law, Jupiter more the spirit of the law, the meaning of the law, and then Saturn enforcing rules. And anytime we get a yes or a no between Jupiter and Saturn, you also start to get a structure inherently from creating that kind of algorithm almost. When you start to create walls and make structures, and there's like an in and out, that can be part of structure too. So I think there's some semantics here at play that one could go around in circles about, in terms of, well, what are structures that don't have edges or boundaries or walls? Is it still a structure? And Jupiter is about order. Is Jupiter about structure because it's about order? Because not all structures have order. There's plenty of structures evolutionarily in the body that don't make a lot of sense. There's not a lot of inherent sense to why they are the way that they are or why they do the things the way that they do as far as we understand them. There's just a lot of stuff, I think, in nature that, yeah, it's a structure. It has components that are structural, but is it coherent? Is it meaningful? Does it have order? Does it make sense? That is a different question. And so this is where, I've spent probably with this question, I have been pondering this question for probably a couple years now. Ever since I was on Twitter and I saw people arguing about it. And that was the first time I ran into, and I wish I could remember who they were because I would give them credit for teaching me about the sun and Jupiter having a role to play in order and structure. Because I had just been like a Saturn girly. I was like, give me some edges, give me some boundaries. We got a structure. We're good. We got a container. Woo. Um, but and knowing that meaning and coherence and all of that was relevant too within that. But yeah, these Twitter arguments, the discourses that happen on social media, this is one of them. And I finally made a spreadsheet about it. And so I wanted to share it. So my kind of take on this then, and I mentioned it to begin with. Oh, and before I get to that, the Orphic hymn part. And this is part of what bothered me about it from the beginning too. About Saturn not being included in the conversation. Because it's not that I don't think we need to put, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, just because Sun and Jupiter definitely play a part in order and structure for sure. I don't think Saturn doesn't, though. I don't think they don't play a part in it. And one thing is how they're about the land. They're about what is underneath the earth. They're kind of this undergirding kind of influence in that way. As someone who comes from an agricultural farming background, everything about it is structural all the time. There's structures everywhere, time structures, there's time systems. You got to milk these cows, man. They're not going to milk themselves. We did not have dairy, but all my friends did. But, similarly, you plant the fields at certain intervals. You switch out crops in a certain time frame, this year after that year to make sure the soil didn't get all screwed up. There's so much system and structure in land and agriculture that it's hard for me to separate in that way. And maybe that's why I'm like, don't tell me I can't have Saturn be structure. But what I'm thinking here, Orphic hymn wise, obstetric, this is from the hymn to Saturn, obstetric nature, venerable root from which the various forms of being shoot. Obstetric nature, venerable root from which the various forms of being shoot. That's the Thomas Taylor version. The Sarah Mastro's Orphic hymn says, "You give birth to all growth, and you make all things die." You give birth to all growth, and you make all things die. And this actually sounds a lot like the Jupiter kind of principle. And I think both Jupiter and Saturn, especially the way that ancient astrologers put them together, including Dorotheus, Rhetorius. I was also just listening to Austin Coppock's 36 Dramas, where he does all the planetary two planet combinations. And the Jupiter Saturn one, he takes on like Valens and Firmicus and his. They all say this stuff about management of the world, management of stuff and things and people, and like very world buildy. It's incredibly world buildy to me. So, my final answer is that it's all three of them, and they all have different roles and parts. And it's a diurnal process. And this echoes something that I heard Robert Hand say in his lecture about Jupiter's role as a malefic. Jupiter as a malefic, so it's like a Robert Hand Norwalk lecture you can find if you Google it. Um, but he talks about the boundlessness of nocturnal planets and the diurnal planets, the diurnal world being bound within some kind of reason and rationality and order and nocturnal being more boundless in essence, and not like in this weird chaos like like the feminine principle is chaotic and the masculine principle is orderly. I'm not going down that weird patriarchal road. But there is something about this, like all that aside, diurnal, order, structure, nocturnal, more boundlessness. Yeah, final answer. New hill to die on. New spreadsheet that I won't share because it's sloppy. I wish I could share it with you all. Don't know why I needed to put my wheel up for all of that. Let me see if there's any thoughts. Hello, Marshall Greer. Welcome. Yeah, and thank you for saying that, Marshall. The Taylor translations are good, but I have a very Victorian slant, and they're not my favorite at all, which is why I actually finally bought Sarah Mastros's beautiful book of all the Orphic hymns, which is much more modern, like kind of has a modern understanding of things. And yeah. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. The Taylor translation, it's one of the more accessible ones. Like if you Google it online, that's what you're going to get pretty much. But yeah, there's plenty of others. And Krista Mathis is another one where she has they have a Substack you can subscribe to. I don't know if there's like any print material out at this point from them that I'm aware of. If I'm wrong, please let me know because I want to buy it. Marshall's also saying if you jump into the more Jewish side of things, Saturn is the Sabbath, the day of rest, and God of rest. So resting from all of the labors is very Saturnian. Yeah, that would make sense too. The coin with two sides in terms of labor and rest and how they have to go together, right? Ideally. Um, yeah, cool. Thanks for listening. So if anyone has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, let me see if there's any other notes I had. No, I don't think so. I did want to mention Mercury though. So actually I do want to share my wheel. So Mercury's speed right now is about half of what it could be. So I know they're direct. I kind of want to do a little PSA, I guess, in case anyone is wondering or needs validation. But I know Mercury is direct and they are also visible, but they are going about a degree a day roughly right now, and they're capable of going more than 2 degrees a day. So they are at about half of what they're capable of in terms of speed. And so likewise, Mercury stuff is about going probably, I'm going to make up fuzzy math and say we're also at half speed of half of possible speed in terms of communication, commerce, exchanges of some kind, maybe travel. Any of these mercurial communication and anything like that might still be on the slightly slower side. That being said, I mean, I feel like when Mercury is going 2 degrees a day, it's like too fast for me personally, as a Mercury Neptune person. But yeah, anyway, I just want to point that out. Mercury is not as fast, even though they're direct. So if you had the Mercury direct station and you're like, and now we are over a week later, and maybe you still have not received your letter in the mail. I'm waiting to like I've been waiting to call my brother for like way too long. Any like loose ends. I feel like we're still kind of wrapping that up because we're still in the post retrograde shadow, but then also, even though it's direct, still not as fast as they could be. And I mean, sure, dial it up because of Aries, but sometimes I wonder, is Aries the pace or is it just the sense of urgency and the pace I wish it was? Uh, yeah, that could be a thing. Hello, Holly. Welcome back. Okay. Well, that was my agenda items. Let me just scrounge my document one more time. Otherwise, if I can't think of anything, I might just look at the transits for a little bit. And then I also I might stop it early. Um, oh yeah, I did have one kind of interesting news tidbit that I ran into. So we've been having the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and there's a lot of talk about liberation, movements for freedom and independence, and all of that. And there's a lot of protests going on right now, as we can see. Uh, what another one that I did not have on my bingo board for this year, and I heard this on PBS NewsHour, was that there's a portion of people in Eastern Oregon, the state of Oregon in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. The eastern part of Oregon wants to secede and become Greater Idaho, which is next door. So I did not have that on it's the conservative folks in the rural parts, and they do not resonate with the policies of the West, the more progressive policies of the West. So it makes sense. It does, like on that surface level, but still, like, wow, okay, Jupiter and Uranus, it is everywhere. It's doing all sorts of things. So I thought that was a very fascinating example. They want to be Greater Idaho. And I might worry about offending someone. I don't think there's anyone listening to this who wants to be part of Greater Idaho. I don't think they're gonna get lost here. Um, yeah, isn't that wild? Like the secession energy is running a bit high. It's always been high in Texas, but I mean that's not a surprise to anyone. Okay, hold on one second. Okay. Woo. All right. Well, let's just take a look at transits then. And if anyone does have any questions, let me know. Of course, I do my forecast. So if you're interested, go check out my forecast. But yeah, let's just look at the weather right now and kind of what's going on while we're here and pick apart right now. Moon is moving right into a square with Saturn. So that's just okay. This is the energy of, a bit of slowness, a bit of delay, a bit of seriousness. Uh, it's not a good time to like request things from people because Saturn is the Lord of rejection, and that's who the moon is running into. They will clear this in just a few hours. So let's actually see. Yeah, 12:02 a.m. Central Time. This will be Friday morning if you are in Europe. Uh, Later in the day, Friday, the further globally east you go. But yeah, the moon's going to be square Saturn pretty much effectively for the rest of today on the 9th in the west and most of the day for the east tomorrow. Um, After that, the moon is going to start to come into a sextile with Mercury. That's a little bit higher speed. I think it'll be much more, yeah, fast. The pace will pick up considerably after this time. Oh, oh, we just had two. I don't know if anyone was following. Here's a good reflection point. The Mercury and Chiron conjunctions. I don't know about you, but I definitely noticed them in my life. Let's look at those again. I know I did talk about this in the forecast, so sorry if you already saw that, but um, I think it's worth revisiting now that we've had the third one. So the first one of these, it was a three-part thing, and the first one was on March 20th. We had Mercury joining Chiron, and I'll break it down symbolically in a second, but the second of three hits was April 15th at 19. And at that point, Mercury was retrograde. So they were doing their second hit. And then the third was on May 6th. So the third and final at 21 degrees. So Mercury being words, messages, communication, Chiron being potential ouchies, recurrent challenges, but also potential for healing and learning in that way. Uh, I actually noticed like I had someone in my life who had been working toward and actually got a diagnosis finally that they needed after a very long time. And it was so literal. They're in Aries rising, and it was like the message of what the medicine will be came. It was very literal. So I was like, okay, Chiron is probably about medicine and doctors sometimes, definitely, and healers. It's true. And Mercury being visible, that also really helps for messages and understanding and information to be passed along. But again, like depending on where you are in that process, sometimes Chiron is this ouchy, difficult kind of situation. I think for me, it was going through questioning myself on a number of regards in terms of my knowledge on a lot of things in life. Like several occurrences in my third house of foundational knowledge and learning. Um, in my third house, mega, yeah, it came up as like a lot of learning curves being rectified and sorted out, but it wasn't fun. It was kind of tedious and laborious, and I didn't want to do it. Uh, but it wasn't bad. It certainly wasn't a bad thing. And at this point now, I think we can see ourselves on some of the other sides of these processes that really began back on March 20th. So look to the Aries part of your chart, and look at those house topics to kind of figure out what that might have been about. Oh, Holly, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Yeah. The May 6th one being that was the final of the three, I feel like that was really kind of putting the last plot points on a story that's been going on for a while. So yeah, so hopefully it was more on the healing side of things for people. Even though Chiron, I always say this, but like the kind of healing that comes with Chiron, like it's not always like a relief, like a Jupiterian relief. It's more like, oh yeah, it's healing and I can tell and it doesn't feel good, but I know it's healing. That feels more like Chiron to me in a lot of ways. So that was worth talking about. What else is going on? Yeah, anytime the moon is with Gemini right now and it's getting this overcoming square from Saturn, especially if you have mutable planets, like I have a Pisces moon, so um I feel like anytime the moon now is in mutable signs, it just pings right into that whole thing. So if you're a mutable person, these mutable moons might not be your favorite right now, while Saturn is in Pisces. But yeah, I more so. And the 11th, question mark on that day. 13th, 14th, 15th were definitely a little bit more lively and somewhat in a good way. But yeah, I guess not to make people paranoid or doomsay, but I think a lot of times Mars sending an overcoming square to the moon can just be busyness, putting in a lot of effort, and it can be a fast pace. So, but it is a bit crunchy, and this is like the classic configuration for getting in fights with people. So pick your battles on the 11th. But if you're just busy and kind of kicking ass and taking names on the 11th, sure, do it, get it done. I would just make sure you're hydrating, making sure you're resting as much as you're putting in effort, if at all possible, because that Mars, especially with the North Node, can be a lot of gas in the tank, a lot of fuel to go, but we want to hydrate. Um, but yeah, then the moon eventually clears that, and then I think the rest of their time after that Mars square, the rest of their time in Cancer is going to be pretty nice. They're going to be getting a sextile from the benefics. And even when they're kind of dealing with a funky little T square as they enter the last degrees of Cancer. Um, so May 11th and then May 13th, there's this little bump in the road. I don't know what this is. I mean, it could be very constructive and progressive, but it's kind of a pressurized looking day in terms of Pluto, Mercury, Moon, T square action on the 13th. But then after that, the 14th, the 5th, well, later on the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, then we get this nice square from the benefics. We get this really invigorating trine from Mars and no riffraff from Saturn. So I kind of dig. I'm really digging the middle of this month. Yeah, for a lot of reasons. And just in general, I mean, the problems I'm finding with the weather this month, they're not in the grand scheme of things. They're held pretty well. May is a great month. So I've said it before, I'll say it again. May is very nice. Yeah, and lots of Uranus action. Thank you, Valerie. Yeah, I mentioned it. My forecast, I talked a bit more about the sun being with Uranus and Venus being with Uranus. So definitely, and I give some more practical life advice about what to do with that. So check out my last forecast because I definitely go over the Uranus things. But thank you for bringing that up because, yeah, on the 13th, Sun in Uranus, right on your Mars. Oh, well, let's take a peep. Oh, so this is what we're talking about here. First, the Sun conjoins Uranus, then Venus will eventually. This is a very yeah, it's the free will that we have. The sun is our sense of will, the action that we do. And when Uranus is linked with our kind of sense of self, our sense of will, our sense of action, that's they just kind of want freedom, space, independence, be able to express themselves authentically. Um, yeah, definitely. And when I think about Sun Uranus people in my life, like this conjunction, my mother is one in Leo. So I was raised by this energy, and my chart ruler is conjunct Uranus. There is definitely an independent streak, a need for space sometimes. So if it's just happening in transit and it's happening over your Mars, when it comes to Mars, how you do effort, how you do action. If you're trying to build a piece of IKEA furniture, if you are trying to solve a problem, if you are trying to make dishes or make dinner and do the dishes, Mars is how you do all that. It's that's another kind of action. Both Sun and Mars are about our actions. Mars is definitely that deciding kind of factor. This is the order of operations. This is how I'm going to solve this problem. This is how I'm going to move through this thing. You might need a little extra space to do that. It's kind of like I can imagine. I'll just go back to building the IKEA furniture. The classic disagreement about how to do it, even down to like, do we read the instructions or not? Do I just do it because I built the same shelf like 5 times before? And maybe you have a different way of doing it than your friend or your partner. So make sure you have space and freedom and autonomy to do things your own way that day, whatever anyone else says. Yeah, I think sometimes in Taurus, we can want to kind of keep the peace so much. And, Venus is here too. So she's like, keep the peace. Not to say she can't battle, she can, but in Taurus, there is generally a desire to maintain things and to keep the peace so we can maintain things. Um, And so we can suppress a desire to act or to exercise our will in the way that we want. We can suppress our authentic expression, and then it can kind of bubble out and over into things. So as long as I think, let's just say mid-May, we're all going to need a lot of space to just be ourselves, to express ourselves. And, maybe let's just use Jupiter, use Venus to give each other the benefit of the doubt for the month of May. I wonder if there's anything else I need to say about that. I mean, when I think about Mars, it can be sudden breakthroughs in terms of how you want to place your effort, where you want to focus, sudden breakthroughs or insights with Jupiter there too, in terms of how to do conflict, how to do healthy conflict. Got to confront stuff sometimes, got to do conflict sometimes. Maybe it's about that, shining a light, having some insights about that. Yeah, I know Algol, there's a fixed star Algol around there somewhere that can speak to Medusa-like themes. And I do feel like Medusa is a character that in the pantheon or in the myth, um, man, they're not very nice to her. I feel like they should have been nicer to Medusa, you know? Um, but there's kind of this like losing your head or um kind of losing your cool potentially with Algol there. I don't know if, Uranus being by that fixed star riles anything up, but I guess if, I always look at a chart, this is our internal world, this is us. This is also our external world and other people. So if Uranus and Sun are on your Mars and there's Algol nearby, if people around you are being absurd or silly, let them be that way at a distance. You do that over there, I'll be over here. Um, yeah, but I don't foresee, I mean, with both benefics here, this is, at what I've been seeing at worst with Uranus, because Uranus can be just disruptions, interruptions, upheaval, turmoil, chaos. All of those words are true. And what I'm seeing sometimes with folks is that they're having disruptive, chaotic events happen, but Jupiter is reflecting that nothing bad happens. Like they get a mulligan, they get a freebie, like they get out of it. Something kind of saves them from something that could have been worse. So at worst, I think, having both benefics here kind of stabilizing things, they'll just help stabilize things at best. All of this kind of interruption and suddenness might be out of some benefit or something like that. When the sun gets involved, then it has to do with our identity, ourselves, our will, what we want to do, who we want to be, who we would like to become, um, all of those things. So, yeah, all of us will be dealing with those themes. All of that is relevant for all of us, but just in like the Taurus part of our chart. So, I was focusing more on martial themes of this affecting like effort, how to handle conflict or anger, how to, where you might want to put focus. But all of these themes of suddenness, uh, sudden insight, breakthrough, disruption, but hopefully to some kind of beneficial ends, needing to be authentic, needing space and independence and freedom to kind of be who we want to be and do what we want to do. All of those themes are actually relevant for all of us in the Taurus house topics. So for me, this is happening in my fourth house of home and private life, dwelling, my parent relationships, my family. And you know what? Honestly, haven't talked to him all month. I talked to my mom once, but I've been pretty independent recently. Kind of feeling that. Just the co-presence of Venus and Uranus. I'm already feeling that. I already am just like, yeah, I need even more alone time. I need some space. Um, so yeah, great question. And hopefully, hopefully it depends too on so many other things. Um, are you a day baby or a night baby? Are you in an annual profection year that activates Taurus or Mars for some reason, or the sun? Yeah, lots of other questions that would change the interpretation that I gave. Yeah, Valerie. All right. If that is the case, then if you are going through some things and it's hard to keep the peace, um, yeah, I've had some things like too, actually, and everything's fine, but yeah, it's a lot. And I keep pulling the Ten of Wands for anyone who knows tarot. I'm like, yes, I realize there are too many wands. I have too many things on my to-do list. So yeah, it'll be extra important for us then, especially as Mars goes into Taurus. When is that? Oh my gosh, hold on, let's look together. Because we're gonna need outlets, my friend. We're gonna need, oh, not that. We're going to need people to talk to. We're going to need outlets for this Mars stuff. I got to start exercising again. My movement practice has been absolutely stagnant. And for the well-being of myself and others, I need to do it. But yeah, June 8th, you know, especially when we get Mars in here, I think we will need to really have outlets for things so that it doesn't bubble over and like really honor our desires. Like Taurus is about sensual pleasure in a lot of ways. What smells good, tastes good, what music do I like, what fabric do I like? And what little ways can we honor ourselves in that way with Taurus? All of this Taurus weather that we're having. How can we really lean into maybe even in small, tiny ways to have autonomy, to have pleasure how we want to have pleasure? And to be very, very independent in that, maybe, or to be very authentic in how and what is pleasurable and being like, yes, I actually really like that. I think that that's great. That's me. Um, and it's hard because that doesn't always fit in with our environment, but I think that'll be good Taurus medicine is just honoring what we do find pleasurable. And maybe that'll take the edge off with some of this Uranus and then eventually Mars energy that's going to come through here. Um, Yeah, all right, my friends. Well, we did end up here anyway at time. Thanks for all your contributions, everyone. Last call, I guess, for questions. Let me see if I have anything worth saying. I don't think so. I guess all of my other offerings are all the same as they usually are. So, again, I do this every second Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern. I do readings. If you like the way that I talk about things or like how I demonstrate, go ahead, book a reading. Always use the discount code Astrology Podcast for 10% off. I am doing a workshop. I'm going to keep it open for a little while longer, but I think I'm going to close it down because I don't want too many people to sign up because I want to be able to work on charts together and not have it take 5 hours. So sign up for the Jupiter and Gemini workshop. Last call on that too, probably. That's going to happen on May 17th. And I will have it listed after the fact as well as a recording that you'll be able to download eventually when I figure out how to do that. So if you can't make it on May 17th at 5:30 p.m., that's okay. Watch for it. This will be evergreen for 1 year, essentially. Jupiter's going to be in Gemini for 1 year. And I want to talk about that, but I also really want to bring in the fact that it's getting an overcoming square from Saturn and Jupiter's going to be in Gemini, which is very interesting terrain for them to be in. So I think there's a lot to discuss, and I've got a strong 2 hours of content about Jupiter going into Gemini and all of the things that will affect that. So you can sign up for that on my website, book a reading at my website. I have mentoring as well. If you are looking for tutoring, mentoring, especially in terms of Hellenistic astrology methods, we're doing that. And then I do have a sliding scale if finances are an issue, especially if you're someone who is the victim of oppression in some way, shape, or form. You can read more about my sliding scale on my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. And it gives you all of the instructions if you want to book with me under the sliding scale. And last thing is I'm also with Melissa. I am helping to facilitate a reading group for this book, Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune by Chris Brennan. And we are starting chapter 7 next month. And we're finally going to get into the planets. We've been doing this for like 6 months at least, and it took us that long to get through the first, like all of the history stuff. So we're finally done with most of the history stuff, and we're going to finally start to get more into technique and things of that nature. So it's never too late if you're part of the Hellenistic astrology course. This book club thing that we're doing is 100% free and available to those who are part of the course already. So please like hit us up, email me, aligninglight@astro@gmail.com if you have questions about that. Um, all right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your evening, and I will catch you here for the next forecast. That is going to be on the 15th of May at 11 a.m. Central Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, that's Wednesday, May 15th. We're going to talk about the last 2 weeks of May. So second half of May forecast. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.